Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Rugby with Pads. We're going to jump straight into it today. This is going to be our fancy A to Z, our fancy glossary. It's not an A to Z, we're not American yet. And this is going to be part of the Fancy Beginner series, which has the Fancy 101, 102, the Draft 101, 102, and the Around the League updates on both pre-season and off-season shows as well. I'll put a link somewhere down there to a playlist which is going to contain all of them if you want to have a listen to just that just before the season. Give yourself a refresher, a few hours of stuff just to give you an edge. Right, we'll start with beginning of the alphabet. ADP. ADP is an acronym which means average draft position. Now, what it is a number, a rank that gives you the idea of where a player should or shouldn't be picked. It's a consensus across all drafts, all mock drafts for a particular time. It changes all the time. People go up and down in ADP value based on how in vogue they are. Gabe Davis last year went massively up when everyone thought he would be brilliant, and then he was just a bit meh by the dip, guys. But it's a really good way of looking at players' value and how people are perceiving their value. It's like stocks. I think I see it like a stock market. Your ADP goes up and down. There are guys who always stay at the top. There are your blue chip players. And there are guys who spike based on a bit of news, a bit of gossip as well. So ADP is a really interesting metric for you to take a look at. Moving on, funnily enough, to B. B is for bye weeks or bye-mageddon, bye-apocalypse, or any of those. A bye week is a week where one of your players, one or more of your players, doesn't play because, just like in the regular NFL, they aren't available that week. That they don't have a matchup. There is a rest week. Bye weeks can cause a bye-mageddon or bye-apocalypse when you have lots of players in a particular week that aren't playing. My advice would be to plan ahead. Not too much. Don't change your draft strategy because there's a load of good players who are playing, who aren't playing a game in week 7, for example. It's very early on in the season. It doesn't have to affect your season entirely, but just look out for that if you ever get a chance. Always know what's happening in your roster. C is for commissioner. We've gone over that in a lot of detail in 102. So what I want to talk about is a different thing. I'll talk about ceiling. Ceiling is a term which defines, and I'll do this at the same time as floor as well. So I'll take C and F at the same time. But a ceiling and floor are the range of outcomes for a player in a particular week. And you sometimes get people referred to as floor players, so guys who are really consistent but aren't going to have spike weeks. I'm trying to think of an example there, but a very consistent passer. Geno Smith last year was a really good example of a floor player who had a really good floor but really wasn't going to spike up. And then you have ceiling players like Mike Evans was a really good example last year. He was fantastic in the fantasy playoffs, but he was nothing up until that point. And you get players with high ceilings, high floors, low ceilings, low floors, and players with a big wide range between them. So a ceiling is a really important thing to have in a fantasy because you want to shoot for the stars in your later picks. D is for drafting. Can be really important. Drafting is where you get all your players each year, whether it be in a rookie draft, in dynasty format, or it's in your main draft in your redraft formats. Drafting is really important. We'll do a whole episode of that, and that's why I wanted to drop this in. Whole episode of that coming up in the not too distant future. E is for eliminator. Now, again, it's something that I've started playing this year, in fact. An eliminator is a type of league where each week the worst player, statistically, you look at the points, gets booted out. It's a really, really cruel the type of game because you could be out in week 1. You legitimately could, but it winds it down until there is one player left at the end of week 17. And they hoist the title. Sometimes you get deferred, so make it last all season, but it depends how you're going to be doing that format in your own league. But Eliminator is a league type that I'm trying out this year, and listen out for that on the pod this year. F is obviously for floor. We've already covered that, but I'm going to cover free agents. Now, free agency is interesting. We've talked about FAB in the last episode in the Fantasy 102, but free agents are sometimes when players are available, not on the waiver wire, they're just free for all. And that quite often happens in leagues on Sunday mornings. All players become freely available potentially. If someone has a last minute gap, you haven't set your lineup, it's just a way for people to add players. But be careful because free agents are exactly that. They are completely free to everyone, and it's first come, first serve. So unlike the waiver system, which has a priority free agency, it's a bit messier. Um, Now we are going to look at G for gambling. Now I don't want to talk about gambling in the sense of putting money down. I want to talk about gambling on a player. Now, gamble is in fantasy sports is exactly that. It's playing someone who is potentially high risk, high reward, but maybe is against the consensus. I would encourage everyone to take a gamble during their fantasy playoffs this year, or no, not necessarily fantasy playoffs, but during their fantasy year this year. In 1 week, because you never know, you might A, land on a player that you have a bit more confidence in after that, and B, you might actually destroy an opponent and get them to doubt, which gives you an upper hand moving forward. H is for handcuff. A handcuff is a player that is tied to the fate of another. Now, a great example is running backs. Who's the next man up, effectively? The guy who comes to mind here is Alexander Mattison, is the handcuff for Dalvin Cook. If Dalvin Cook goes down and is not able to play through injury, and is really important in running backs because they get injured a lot, if he's not able to play, Alexander Mattison is going to come up. He's the handcuff. Having a handcuff on your squad, will go over draft strategy and makeup, is sometimes an advantage if you've got a really key player. So Christian McCaffrey, he's got really high draft capital, probably going to go 102, potentially 101 this year. If you've got his handcuff, Elijah Mitchell, it gives you that level of comfort. So it's not all or nothing with him. You've got a kind of decent backup and a decent handcuff, and good handcuffs are really hard to find. And you know what? These days, because of the scarcity of good running backs in the league, sometimes those backups, those handcuffs, are actually held by someone else, and that's something that you can use in your own to your own advantage as well in trading with those players. I is for injury reserve. IR is IR is a spot that can be used in your lineup to have an injured player but not count against your roster, which means you can continue to hold on to him week on, week out, but not play him. Now, there are lots of different rules and ways to manage IR. I work in some leagues where suspensions mean you're IR eligible. Someone that you just have to be out. Sometimes they're on the pup list or whatever, not just officially on IR, which is a much bigger deal in real life NFL. But the IR spot is really careful, and some leagues don't even have it at all. So what I would do is advise you at this point to go and have a look at your rules and see how the IR is used. I use it to a huge advantage a couple of years ago, where I got Calvin Ridley on pup when he was unable to play. Unfortunately, that didn't really work out for me because he didn't play for the rest of the season or the season after that. So maybe a bad example. Great example this year would be John, who's in our Dynasty League, has got Jameson Williams, who is suspended for 6 games. You can hold him on IR, hold another wide receiver that's maybe not as good, but can fill a gap for him at least a little bit. And then when he's off IR, he can release him back into the squad without having to drop him. Now, J was a difficult one for me. There's not many J's in fantasy NFL, in fantasy football. So I've gone for jumbo offense. It's more of an NFL term. Now, a jumbo offense is a 2 tight end package, and it's only really relevant in certain teams. And I think something it's going to be interesting to see how tight ends are used across the league. Now, there are a lot more 2 tight end packages being seen across the league when teams want to run more. Effectively, you get 2 extra blockers potentially, or if teams are wide receiver poor, an example comes to mind of the Patriots. They use 2 tight end packages, and one of those tight ends, or both those tight ends, are always going to be eligible to catch it. There are some very complex rules in the NFL about who is eligible to catch the ball, but ultimately, jumbo offense, 2 tight end packages, and it's maybe more in vogue in your fantasy rosters this year with 2 tight end packages, simply because tight ends might have a bit more value this year in some places, and there's a bit of a contentious switch to whether you actually draft a tight end high or leave them let low and stream them, which is what I've done throughout my career. I might be switching tact a little bit there. Right, we'll take a quick break as we're a fair few letters through the alphabet, and we'll give it a bit of a breather, and I'll see you back on the other side. Right, competition time, guys. rules are on the screen as you see them now, but part one is we're trying to drive subscriptions to rugbywithpads.com. You can find all the information here, but for every single subscription you make from £1 a month, you can get all the benefits like you would do on a normal Patreon. But as you go up, you can also get merch with it as well. And this is how we're selling our merch that you've seen me wearing during some of these YouTube videos as well. If you enter for as little as £1, you'll be entered into the competition. There's bonus entries for higher tiers as well. Now, we'll announce the winner of that on the pod once we've got a minimum of 10 subscribers, and then part two comes in. So get ready already. Go to youtube.com/rugbywithpads, click subscribe and comment on any of the videos. And there's a fair few. We bring out the videos at the same time as we do on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And you'll be entered into a competition to win either a t-shirt or a pop socket. It's free, but we must make sure that part one is won first. Let's drive that traffic over to rugbywithpads.com, and the draw announcements will be on the pod. I'll keep you updated with what we're doing and put some stuff on socials. Right, back to the pod. And we are back just like that. And we're going to go with K for keepers. Now, keeper is a really interesting bridge between redraft, where you get a new team every year, and dynasty, where you keep the same team every year. Keeper is someone you would elect to keep year in, year out. Potentially, you might have a different keeper each year. There might be rules behind that. And I mention it because I'll be talking about my leagues in a bit more detail this year. And I've got a great keeper this year. I am keeping my guy, Justin Fields for the year. I have him available to me as in exchange for a 15th round pick. So I picked him up off of waivers last year, and he will be my keeper. And a keeper is a really interesting way to give you a bit more investment into a redraft league. L is for luck. Now, luck is really important in fantasy football, but it's also something that helps you immensely. It is probably the biggest component. I mean, you can strategize, and that's what we do here. We try and eliminate the need for luck as much as possible. But at the end of the day, if you want to win a championship, you need a bit of luck on your side. But you can create your own luck, and you can create your own luck, subtle plug, by listening to this pod. Now, M is for mock drafts, and we are going to be going through mock drafts loads this year. We're going to be doing at least 4, I think. Yeah. So watch out for those. Mock drafts are really important, and I would always advise you do at least one. Please. If this is a petition out to the masses, if you can do at least one mock draft of your main league, then you'll be in a much better position to understand what's going to go on and who is going to be available where. If you don't know where you're drafting, I would always recommend to draft or mock draft, which is I didn't explain it very well, but a mock draft is a test. You test based on the scoring formats and the format of your league, whether you're going to, who's likely going to fall to you at those positions. It always falls apart in the actual draft a little bit, but it gives you an idea and a bit of steer and a bit of strategy. So that would be my one plea to you: is if you don't know where you're drafting, draft at the start, draft at the end, draft at the middle. See what happens, see whether you like it, and see what kind of players are going to be available. Make a few notes. That's all you need to do. I do it to no end. I do a mock draft a night when it comes into draft season, at the very least, maybe twice. But mock drafting is really important, and it's going to form a really important part of this show as well. Now, N, I debate though this because, again, there's not many fantasy football terms here, but of course N is for the National Football League, the NFL. But I think I'm going to change it a little bit, and it's going to be no room for error. Now, I say no room for error because there is a lot of room for error during the regular season. You play 14 to 15 matches. You can lose a fair few and still make it to the playoffs. But when you get to the playoffs, when it's single elimination, there is no room for error. And that's why you need to listen to someone like this show to make you as informed as possible and to eliminate the factor of luck. See, it all loops in around this L to N range. And you know what? I'm going to continue on with that as well. O for opportunity. The opportunity to pick someone up who someone else drops is vital. So I would always recommend to keep your eye on the waiver wire as well. So look at who are people that are dropping as well. There are some great pickups available. A couple of years ago, one of my friends picked up Derek Henry because someone mistakenly dropped him, even though he's only going to be unavailable for a couple of weeks. Did massively well, and he didn't end up winning. Did he end up winning a league? end up winning the league the year after. So it worked out really well for me. It was Dynasty League. So yeah, opportunity knocks. You got to hear it. You got to be ready when opportunity knocks is probably the message there. That was a really really weird way of saying that. Let's move on to P. P is for PPR, and we're going to be talking about that a lot. Yeah, we've already talked about it a bit in the Fantasy 102, which I'll link in the description below. But PPR, points per reception, is the way to play fantasy football. I am playing in only one league where it doesn't have a PPR element, and that's from history more than anything. So PPR is the way to play. It has become the standard. So probably next year we don't even need to explain it in our fantasy A to Z. Now Q is for questionable. I bring this up because questionable is the worst status that can be aligned to a player. Questionable could mean anything. Questionable could mean a 50-50% chance of playing, basically. 50-50 is not worth risking on it. So, I'm always really annoyed because questionable means that they could play and they could be amazing, or it means they could be on the field for a few plays. I mean, they're not in there at all. And always be wary and look. If you see a player with Q against their name, look why and make a judgment call yourself whether they're actually going to play, and look at their history of where they've actually played when they've been questionable in the past. Right. We'll take another quick break and go through the last chunk of letters here. We've made good progress and we're rattling through. So I will see you on the other side. And just like that, we are back once again. And we're going to go R for... There's a load of things I could do here that aren't particularly interesting. But regular season. Now, the regular season is between your matchups between week 1 and 15, or depending on when your playoff starts, could be going to week 15 and 16 as well. Remember, no one lets anyone play on week 18. We'll go into that close to the time. But the regular season is what gets you into the championships or into the the contention for the championships, into your playoffs, effectively. You don't have to win every game in a regular season, and you'll see there aren't many teams that go 50-0. If they are, they've done something great, or their league mates are rubbish. Probably the latter more than anything. But being a regular season champion gives you an edge on everyone else moving into playoffs, because you are the one to beat, and you have confidence in your lineup. You've probably you've tuned from a position of power. So regular season and winning it is really important in fantasy football to get those championships. That is probably my one key piece of advice, is try and do as well as you can in the regular season. If you have to drop a couple of games, it doesn't matter too much, but it can give you a psychological edge, I guess. S, well, it's obviously Sunday Night Football. No, we're not going to go into that. We're going to go back to something that is fantasy related. We are going to go into streaming. Now, streaming is not how you watch it. Although for many of you in the UK, maybe it is how you watch it. I watch everything on Game Pass. So, but no, streaming is a term where we are hunting on a position, which is another one. So I'm using terms inside terms. We are giving value to a position to stream the best guy available on waivers in that week. Now, most people stream kickers and defenses because there are lots of them available, and they hold very little value and very little sway in your fantasy lineups. But some people also stream other positions. Tight end, for example, has become a very popular position in recent years to stream, and we'll look at it a bit more in detail when we're coming to roster construction, and we'll do some workshops around that. But yeah, always bear in mind that it's okay to stream a position, just as long as it's not going to kill your team week in, week out. Now, T is for one of, well, it could be Thursday Night Football, but no, instead we're going to talk about trades, and trading being one of the key elements of fantasy football that you don't get in your kind of traditional British fantasy football, the Premier League. Trading is really important to making your team good. It's even more important in Dynasty, where you're stuck with your team effectively, and you need to work to get into a better position or a better posture for your team. But trades are really important, and most importantly, even better, they're fun as well. And you know what? I'm going to link a interview with a traderholic with Dan, who is a regular contributor on this show as well. So we'll link that in the description for you to go and talk about how fun trades can be, and do a bit of a breakdown of them. And if you're interested as well, we'll do a bit of a breakdown of trades as well in our Dynasty League based on our Dynasty Draft Report, which will be either be out now, depending on when we're going to release things, or will be out. Either way, I'll link it in the description. U is for unfair. This whole sport, this whole fantasy football thing is unfair because you are going to get done over at one point or another by fantasy football, but by the fantasy football gods. It is incredibly unfair a game because all it takes is for your guy who has been consistent week in week out in your final game in your championship to fluff it, or for otherwise someone who's you're playing against who hasn't done a thing, who has to start to have an amazing breakout game. Rashad Penny a couple of years ago won me a couple of titles. It was unfair for my getters, but I rode that luck massively as well. So yeah, it's an unfair game because you can't predict things, and for those of you who think you can have a good steer of things and you can get 80% of it right, but that 20%, that will be the unfair bit. Now, V is for, in some cases, it could be Victory Monday, celebrating your victory ahead of all the games being played. You're so confident you're ahead. You crack open a beer on a Monday night and just watch the sport. Just watch the game just for the fun of it, not because you've got anything tied to fantasy football. But instead, I'm going to look at volume, and I think volume is really important in fantasy football because volume is key, especially when it comes to running backs. Now, volume is just a number of times, it's what's the English definition, number of times that person is going to touch the ball or interact with the football. Volume is really key for running backs because the more volume, the more times they're going to break tackles, the more times they're going to get in the end zone. But it can be a double-edged sword because more volume for running backs means more risk of injury as well. So it's worthwhile looking at a player who gets a lot of volume, who is involved in the offense a lot, but involved in a positive and efficient manner. So it's going to be really key, especially when we come to analysing who we want to draft this year. So keep an eye on that as well. W is for waiver wire. The waiver wire is incredibly important. It's where you pick up your players week in, week out to rotate your team. The team you draft is not going to be the team you end with. And all of my championship lineups, team I've drafted has only been maybe 50% of what I end up with, what I actually win with. So using the waiver wire effectively is really important. And listen to our Thursday shows, our Monday and Thursday shows in season, Monday ones especially, for big waiver wire tips each week. X, there's not many things that start with X, so I've gone for X Factor. And X Factor is that je ne sais quoi that your team has or a player has that's going to win you that championship, that you can rely on and that you want to bank on. So X Factor is really important in fantasy football. You can see maybe I was running out of things to talk about at this point, but we will go with Y is Yak Monster. Yak means yards after the catch. Effectively, a guy who can catch it short and get lots of receptions, who's available all the time. Amon-Ra St. Brown, Cooper Kupp, both really good examples of that, who play in the slot and can just go, and they will catch loads more. They will get you loads more points, and they'll just start multiplying after the catch. Deebo Samuel is a great example of that. There's loads of great people, and having a Yak Monster in your team is really fun when you just see him catching it behind the line of scrimmage and then going for 30 yards and just watching your opponent cry as those points rack up. And finally, Zed, we will do something on the Zombie League, which is going to be really important, so listen to that. But I want to talk about Zero RB. And Zero RB is a strategy for drafting that I'm going to try out in a couple of leagues this year. Now, Zero RB is when potentially you're in a position where there are going to be no top-end running backs available to you. So you wait, and you wait, and you wait some more, and then the fifth round comes around, and you continue to wait, and you pick players up in that RB dead zone, where people have already got a couple of their players. There's not much value. What you're waiting for is someone later on in the season to have a bit of a breakout. Now, the idea behind Zero RB is that while people are all spending their picks on high-end RBs who could well get injured, you are looking to secure the bag with more consistent players, people like Kelsey, who are always going to play week in, week out, wide receivers who are less injury prone, quarterbacks who are really going to make a difference and win those positions. So when you've got that running back, it doesn't almost doesn't matter to your team, and you can start streaming running backs or picking players up who have the opportunity to break out. Elijah Mitchell was a great example a couple of years ago when he broke out for the 49ers after being a sixth round draft pick. Isaiah Pacheco last year for Kansas City Chiefs. There are loads of good options to play zero RB, but it does mean sacrificing a very, very important position, and it means putting you in this headspace, which is sometimes perhaps a bit uncomfortable. And that is your A to Z, guys. Thank you so much for listening. I'm going to keep it brief this episode and not do too much grandstanding. As always, you can support the pod in all the usual ways. Rugbywithpads.com. Find me on all of the socials and at rugbywithpads. Thank you to all of our supporters that we've got through rugbywithpads.com, through Buy Me a Coffee. Really appreciate it, and I'd encourage you that the competition is still on. So go and have a look at that episode, and I might drop it in the in the middle as a mid roll on this episode as well. But thank you so much for listening, and I will see you all on the virtual gridiron.